I'm resident of Collinwood for YouTube. Uh, Joined by my buddy Gordon Dymowski, my buddy Patrick McCray. We're here to talk Dark Shadows episode 417, chosen by my buddy Patrick McCray. Patrick, why'd you pick this one, buddy?
Religion is a lie. I'm just kidding. I don't know if that's true. I so now let's see if we have any viewers left. I just wanted to see what would happen. I picked this episode because I was looking at it last week for a possible daybook essay, and it was, it's part of this really deep dish part of the show. I've always had kind of trouble with 1795 because there are parts of it that feel very bland, and there's a lot of suffering in it. I mean, more than normal. And we all know where it's going, which is nowhere good for Barnabas. And so it's kind of like what I imagine spending time on a hot plate must feel like, as the heat's just very slowly turned up. It's just like, oh God, I'm not having fun, and it's getting less fun even now. I know people love it, but I like the character of Barnabas, so I don't like seeing him suffer. Nevertheless, Michael O'Donoghue said making people laugh is the cheapest form of comedy, and sometimes showing people a good time, even through kind of Schadenfreude of watching characters suffer, is the cheapest form of entertainment. And in this case, as much as I have little prejudices against, I almost love Dark Shadows so much I don't like this storyline. I'm absolutely awed by it. And a lot of, I think, my better pieces come from 1795. It has the capacity to surprise me again and again with how basic it is. I almost wish, I like the fact that the show keeps coming back to 1795. I almost wish it would do it more to remind viewers of kind of how they got where they got. So this is one of those episodes that begins with a crucial observation that's implied, and then ends with another crucial observation. So the crucial observation it begins with that I really like is that Barnabas is ticked off that Ben Stokes hasn't killed him. And I think, and Gordon, when I finally wind down in 3 or 4 years from this monologue, you probably would have some good insight on this. I don't think Barnabas wants anyone to kill him, because or I don't think he wants to be dead, or deader, or second dead, or whatever you want to call it, because if he really wanted to be non-existent, he would just go sit on Widow's Hill and wait for the sunrise. I mean, he knows that this would do it. And yet he doesn't. He keeps asking arguably the least trustworthy people he can find to do the deed. Ben Stokes, his emotionally rattled parent, people like that. He might as well ask Noah Gifford while he's at it. This is not the act of someone who actually wants to die. This is someone who wants to be able to say they're doing it out of some weird, I swear to God, he's almost Catholic, sense of guilt over who he is. So that's the first thing that occurred to me when I was watching this. But the amazing thing at the end is watching Josette and Barnabas, because for a lot of people, the mystery in Dark Shadows is the Josette, or is the Barnabas Angelique revelation in 1840. He's in love with her, and to that, I just I can only say to anyone who's confused by that, I can only say, and I'm confused by you. Have you seen Angelique? Have you listened to her speak? Have you watched? She's this marvelous, volitional, bright, passionate individual. Um, yeah, I mean, she's ruthlessly immoral and so on and so forth, but at least she's got some zest for living, you know. Um, by comparison, we watched the Barnabas Josette thing, and we pine for Josette because, for one thing, our initial narrative about Josette comes strictly from Barnabas and from his anecdotal reports about her. And then except for the ghost appearing here and there, but then when we meet her, I mean, yeah, it's nice. She's nice. And she's got money, and she's got the whole social class thing going on. It'll make his father happy, and they'll, make a lot of money, and so on and so forth. And so I'm sure there's a lot of pressure on him from a lot of different directions. And I don't accept that Barnabas is 27. He's clearly 44. I think that's a mistake on a tombstone or something. He just didn't want to pay to get another stonemason to come in and carve out a new date. So there it goes. So, he's this 44-year-old unmarried guy. He's no great shakes at business. It's even unclear kind of what he does. He's not a wastrel, but Barnabas doesn't seem to be really good at a lot of things. We don't hear a lot about him saying, well, Dad, I got to go down to the shipyard or something. There's very little of that. And so finally he has a reason to be. He's a raison d'etre. He can marry Josette, and the whole thing can make his father happy, and he can be a Collins and all that. So that seems to be what's on the surface, but still, after death, other than being embarrassed that he initiated this whole thing, why on earth is he concerned with this woman? Well, this episode, I think, shows why. And it's in this marvelous scene, Jonathan Friend, Catherine Lee Scott, where she comes and visits him, as she said she would. And what I get from that is, because he kind of, vaguely sort of comes out of the closet about it's not quite like all men. And Catherine Lee Scott sells unconditional acceptance. I don't think she knows quite all the conditions that are possible, but to her knowledge, unconditional acceptance. And everything in Barnabas's life has been conditional, especially living with, Naomi and Joshua, and living up to Jeremiah's example and everything else, that's and he's finally started to meet the conditions by marrying her, and then everything goes to hell. And then he marries a serving girl. Oh, Lord. I mean, that just puts him in even worse stead. It's not better, it's worse for him in terms of the social class issues at the time. And then he's a vampire, and the way she treats him is so... Because I never really understood the idea of unconditional love. Because I think there's always a condition. The condition is don't pour vinegar in my eyes. I mean, yeah, there are conditions. Be someone I want to love. That's a condition, and that's still true. But this idea of, within that, this very pure sense of acceptance that she has, I see in this episode. And considering then what happens to him for the next 170 something years, and he pops out of that, he's scared to death, he's trying to make this new life, and then there she is. To have that source of unconditional acceptance again, right there, is something that I think Barnabas is particularly vulnerable to in 1967. And considering how untrustworthy and uncertain and duplicitous even his friends are, that paragon is vital. And I think that gets very, very well established here. So it is mythically just a bedrock piece of storytelling, and is crucial to Dark Shadows. It is not a pleasure to see Barnabas in so much pain, but my God, we understand him. And I think if we're honest, we understand a little bit more about ourselves as we watch it. And I've often said Barnabas is more than a character. He's a companion, and a companion we want to solve. And this is one of those episodes that really gives us that push. So
go ahead, Gordon. Your turn.
Oh, sorry. I was starting to nod off a bit. Long day, but now I think that to Patrick's first point about whether Barnabas wants to kill himself or not, I think with Barnabas at this point, he's got two. It's two conflicting impulses. He's the obvious that he wants to die, but he doesn't really want to die. He just wants what he's going through to end, which are two completely different things. I don't know if at this point he would necessarily see that, if I wanted to die, I'll just hang out and try to get a suntan in the dawn, and an everlasting suntan. I think the thing about this storyline that I think is really, and I think it's really key for the series as a whole, is that it shows that it's not just the Collins family in the present that's cursed. That it has antecedents. It's kind of that first. It's several generations back. Because 1795 kind of starts to establish a lot of the formal mythology for the show. Before, it's been all, family history and things that are said in the present. But now we actually get to see some of those past events play out. And I think what he's trying to do is, I think in his own way, Barnabas is trying to sacrifice himself for the greater good of the family. But he's going to the people who he thinks erroneously would do it. Because if he really wanted to, if he thought there was someone who could competent who'd do it, he'd go to he wouldn't go to Ben, because Ben is too much of the loyal servant and friend, and as we later find out, Angelique's floating head stops him. But even his father is like, after all that, finding out that your son is this creature, and your son's asking you to kill him, the first thing you do is, this isn't Edward in 1897, where he's like, okay, yeah, we're gonna take care of the monster. This is, we really see that Barnabas comes from a really messed up family. That the curse it's not just the vampirism. That I think it shows that this Collins family really is cursed. We'll later on find out where that curse comes from, and even there, I think there's still questions. But I think this is an episode that, when you're building towards the inevitable, we know what's already happened because we've seen Barnabas in 66 as a vampire. Now it's kind of getting to the point of, okay, not just how does he get into the coffin, but what's the damage that's happened to his family? Because he's lost his mother, he's lost a surrogate brother, he's lost his sister. This is a guy who really has not had to deal with a hell of a lot. Maybe the most is presumably an arranged marriage and some kind of affair, both physical and possibly emotional. I do think this is a guy who really never had any proper adult coping skills, no matter what his age.
Yeah. This episode is narrated by Catherine Lee Scott, written by Ron Sproat, directed by Leva Swift.
Wait, hold on. It's written by Ron Sproat, right?
Yeah.
This is the guy that some other people give a hard time to. Am I not mistaken?
You're not mistaken.
Ron Sproat's a really good writer.
Yeah, he is.
May I ask what the big deal is about Ron Sproat? Mostly because I don't see any.
Some some person who isn't on this podcast to defend themselves, so I won't knock them.
No, I'm not knocking him. I'm standing up for Ron Sproat.
No, Ron Sproat is a very talented writer, and when you look up the DS episodes he wrote, you could tell, hey, this guy's no hack. He's, but some people don't like the way he writes. And look, if you don't like the way a guy writes, then that's your opinion.
That's fascinating. Yeah, just because I didn't pay attention to the fact that this is written by Ron Sproat. And didn't Ron invent a lot of the Barnabas mythology?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the Gene Coon.
Yeah.
What Gene Coon is to Vulcans, and so on.
And I will say this: it would not surprise me if there's an interview where Sproat admitted that while he was writing the Barnabas stuff, he had a copy of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend on his bookshelf. Because there's a lot of the thinking about that in terms of the kind of the real world approach that I think, it's less actual segments and more just kind of that thinking, because he does lay down between this and the early 210s, there's a lot of Barnabas-centric mythology where it really feels like now the Collins family has a history. It's moving from the widows of Widow's Hill to just being Widow's Hill, because that name is just so evocative anyway. You don't need a whole mythology about it.
I really like Ron Sproat.
Yeah, and I'm not seeing why anyone would pick on him as a writer particularly. I mean, because he's not. There's really no hackery in the writing that I can see. Well, except for one episode during the Leviathan sequence, but I think that was a necessity then.
Is that emergency rewrite episode?
9:15.
I'm even okay with that. I mean, to me, that's just part of the story. It's a weird twist.
Yeah, but it's but it's like there's really no. I mean, except for like at least even the first 200, the pre-Barnabas stuff, you can see that the writers are trying to. They're kind of aiming for something, and they're kind of adjusting course. So they're trying to find the voice of the show, and then when Barnabas comes in, it's like, okay, we know where we're going, and we think we have something, and we run with it. And 1795 is them going, okay, they're at a pretty good sprint right now. They know they can do the vampire. Now let's see if we can do historical drama.
And they can. Very well.
This is 10 years before John Carpenter's Halloween. And the one thing Dark Shadows and my second favorite franchise, Halloween, have in common, that both franchises have in common, Dark Shadows has always been about fate as much as any other character. Fate is much of a character as Satan, Barnabas, Widow's Hill, and etc. When you go back to the beginning episodes, Dark Shadows is really talking about fate. We learn early on, Josette's fate is what? She's meant to die. No matter who she marries. She marries Jeremiah, she's going to die. When we come back to the past, when we finally get the appearance of Barnabas Collins in episode 211, he talks about Josette's death quite romantically. Then we see Josette's death. Nothing changes, even with Victoria Winters going back in the past. Someone literally taking Phyllis Wick's place. Though Victoria's journey isn't exactly Phyllis Wick's journey, fate never changes at all. It's a common theme for the show. Fate is going to happen whether you want it to or not. Barnabas isn't meant to be with Josette ever because it's not in fate's cards or hands or whatever fate has written out for these characters.
So, Jewel, does this change with Quentin? Because fate as a bully eventually becomes, for a show that involves time travel, becomes a really boring companion. Because it negates our ability to do anything. I mean, it's like, well, why bother? And I see your point that, that there are wheels in motion really before we join the series.
Yeah.
That seem to really be pushing things towards a certain direction with Josette. And that no, because Vicky didn't go back to stop or change anything,
Right.
so she has no responsibility to do that.
Right.
And yeah, it is ironic that she and Phyllis Wick suffer, the same kind of fate. We can assume that, Angelique was able to stick Phyllis Wick with a lot of this stuff, that time around. But by the time we get to Quentin, which is the next time that sort of fate takes a hand, everything changes. And then, aren't there like all sorts of weird things that are prophesied to happen in 1840, that this is how so and so was going to die and this is what was going to happen, but none of those things end up happening, or they don't quite happen the same way. So do they eventually figure out ways to change the timeline and circumvent fate, or how does that integrate? Where does that change?
Well, here's my thing. I don't think Quentin's fate ever really changes, because Angelique tells Barnabas in 1897, she says, "Oh, you're here about the werewolf, okay? Well, who becomes the werewolf? Quentin. That doesn't change at all. Like and Barnabas is trying to figure out a cure or a way to stop it somehow, and they get the hand of Patofe from the gypsies.
Mm-hmm.
That goes more sideways than you can imagine. Obviously, we know what happens there. Patofe gets his hand back, but it's all look. I honestly think what happened, for the most part, happened without Barnabas. Other than one thing, the only thing I would say changed is because it's not real. If memory serves me, we get the mention of Jameson. We don't get the mention of. I wondered if Jameson's sister lived initially, because we don't hear much about her. I wonder if Laura took Jameson's or
Nora.
I think Nora always lived. I don't think Nora
she lived. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me maybe put a different spin on take a different perspective on what Joel's saying. I don't think the show's about fate. It's about choices, and how not only can you live with the consequences of your choices, but how do you become a different person by making different choices? Because Barnabas would have been, had Barnabas chosen not to enter a dalliance with Angelique, chances are he still would have married Josette. You would have no vampire. We actually have two whole storylines that involve Barnabas not being a vampire. But when he chooses to, because of that, and because Angelique chooses to be nasty about it, where in this episode he is a vampire. He is choosing to not want to live, but he's making unhealthy choices as the way to do it. He's not doing the simple, oh, okay, today's a good day to watch the sunrise on the beach. He's going to people who cannot help him, as to Patrick's point. When you look at 1897, later on, Quentin is chosen to fool around with Edward's wife, run away with her, and basically he's choosing to be a complete and utter bastard. But when Barnabas comes in, he, there's a theory in quantum physics that says the act of observing affects the observed. So with Barnabas coming in, that changes the whole dynamic. So, Quentin.
Yeah, I charted 1897, and I don't have the particulars. Barnabas changes a lot of events fairly early on. He certainly, so with Grandmama dying, well, there go, Xandor Magda. And because she's the grandmother's the only thing that's keeping them on the property, I suspect. Judith can't stand them. Edward can't stand them. They don't cook. They don't clean. What do? They take up this valuable piece of property. And so with Barnabas there suddenly saying, "Oh, I need them as the new Lumai," that keeps them around. That means that there is someone to get weird over the death of Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
Which, here's the weird part, which means that it actually suggests that Barnabas's involvement helps him become the werewolf. It's interesting to figure out what the timeline would have been and how all the werewolfian things would have happened. I guess maybe Magda would have found out by correspondence and cursed Quentin that way.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of weird little places where Barnabas has already started to screw up or make right the timeline.
Yeah, and seeing that in terms of choices, because Barnabas is involved in changing things, people are making different choices. So Quentin chooses to behave in one way where he gets cursed, but then when he's confronted with the fact that A, he has kids, and B, his son died and his daughter's wherever, he starts making a different set of choices. But these are all choices towards a weird form of like self-fulfillment, that they're becoming better people.
Sure, 1897 is all about transformation. You know, we think it's about transformation into a werewolf. It's not. It's transformation into a grown-up, which is what Quentin does. And here's the wacky thing: other than Ezra Braithwaite, who doesn't really count, there's no one from the 1897 era around to say, "Hey, this went this way, that went that way. Things are now different." At no point do I recall Quentin, when he shows up in the 20th century, saying, "Well, I remember the timeline before you came back, Barnabas, but then everything changed when you did." He never says that. And I contend again and again that a whole lot of crazy stuff can happen in 100 years, or, how it is 75 years. I really don't think that's Quentin's body in the room. Because if Barnabas changes the timeline, there is no Quentin's ghost. If there is no Quentin's ghost, the people at Collinwood don't remember the ghost of Quentin. So what they thought was the ghost of Quentin isn't. That's something else. That's Judah Zachary or something. And the only person who would really have been in a position surviving, well, I guess it's Charles Delaware Tate, but he doesn't bring up the subject, would have been Jameson, if Jameson were still alive. But Jameson's dead. So there's no one to verify or disqualify any of that. Maybe Barnabas always went back.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that was always part of things. So in a sense, Joel, that is fate.
Well, there's two. When I talk about fate too, I do agree with you. I don't think it's Quentin's ghost. They see. There's the seance that's held with Professor Stokes. I think Carolyn's there, and Jennings is there. Chris Jennings is there.
Is that when Magda first is mentioned?
Yeah,
and first appears. Yeah.
Magda is mentioned. Magda's spirit, I think, speaks through somebody, and her name is mentioned. So at least her name is mentioned. I do remember that much.
Yeah.
So, and when her name is mentioned, Jennings loses it and just gets up and interrupts the seance. He totally breaks it. And Stokes isn't happy he did this. In fact, he goes, "I'm curious as to why you did that, Mr. Jennings." Because he's pissed off at him. And here's the thing. Jennings does it because he knows that name. Well, when you know that name, I don't think Magda and her husband ever leave. I think they just stay in Collinsport. They may not stay at the old house.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
That's
but I think they stay somewhere in Collinsport. Look, there's a lot of empty houses probably looming the countryside somewhere, but where a gypsy can stay unnoticed, I'm sure. But I do think they stayed, and I do think no matter what that Patofe does arrive, because I do think, look, there's the prophecy, right, that bullets found. The only person who could have helped Quentin died. I think that prophecy was always there. We just finally hear about it when we go back to 1897. And by the way, what's something they find in the present day? A coffin.
Yeah, and
A coffin for a
the
child.
pentagram.
For a child too.
Mm-hmm.
So we know about Quentin's children, one who dies. So there's that. I do think that fate you can't, Angelique is warning Barnabas, you can't change anything. And really, what she's meaning is you can't change Quentin's fate. And really, the only person who really does is Count Patofe by saving him from Beth's ass. But in all honesty, who's to say that didn't happen anyway? We don't know.
Yeah.
Well, we do know, but again, there's that. Barnabas goes back, and because of a ghost that is calling himself, that they say is Quentin.
Yeah.
So there was a show I was watching, I forget what it was, where it was about a haunting, where the
Ghost of Mr. Chicken.
saw a ghost.
Yeah, that's it. Ghost of Mr. Chicken.
That wasn't representing who they actually were. They were taking the form of somebody else. So could that happen? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think I certainly am not, saying you're wrong or challenging any of that. I think my issue from an authorial point of view with the idea of fate is that it relies on a much vaster mechanism to be relevant. Because Julie, you're a parent, and so I'm sure that there are times when there are lessons that you need to give your kids about life and so on and so forth. I don't think at any point has any parent said, you know what, that kid needs to learn a lesson about fate. But seriously, I mean, as Gordon pointed out, learning lessons about choices and about how to make the right choices and so on and so forth, that's certainly a thing. But I'm not saying that this is not the basis for stories. This is just a philosophical thought about the idea of fate. What do I do with that? So there is some unseen course of action ahead of me towards which I am careening, but I don't, until I'm there, I won't know the steps that were inexorably determined to lead me there, And so I think fate is a very kind of oldie-timey, not as bad, but it's a very sort of old-fashioned storytelling tool that's, fine for Oedipus Rex and Macbeth and stuff like that. But as a viewer, I've never gone, boy, I'll tell you, I have really connected with that story about fate. Holy cow. How many times has fate? No, nobody does that. I think you have to exist in a universe with all sorts of, other beings pulling strings and so on and so forth for that to be relevant. So it's always a real funny storytelling element for me.
Well, no, I don't. When I talk to my kid, it's something I talk to my daughter about, is because she always feels when she makes a decision, she's making the wrong one. And the decision isn't an important one. And I tell her, look, you choosing a certain soft drink over another soft drink, you're not making a wrong choice either way. It's your personal choice. That's a whole nother matter. When I talk about fate being a character in a fictional show, though a lot of these characters weren't initially planned for, when we find out about them, we have to put in the contrast, or at least I do, of fate. Okay, Edith was always meant to die.
No, Edith. Oh, Edith. Sorry.
Yeah, Edith Collins was always meant to die, whether Barnabas went back or not. Why? Because Nobody in 1967, when Barnabas is let out, the only thing they know about him, your ancestor went to England and died. And what's Barnabas say? Well, apparently no one told of his, there were no, considering the communication in those days, no one told of, history didn't tell of his marriage. And does Liz correct him on that? Does Elizabeth say, oh, no, you're wrong? No, because he could be right. Again, we're talking about, what I'm talking about is, in the context of storytelling, Barnabas is making up a clever lie that
Right.
Liz is going to believe. One, because of the Collins prestige. Two, because, well, I can't really call him on it because, the communication in those days were by hand. So they would have sucked. So everything Barnabas is saying, though somewhat isn't a total lie, communication those days sucked, he's telling a slight lie that he knows he can get away with. Because, hey, the hands of fate dealt Barnabas a really, really rotten hand. I mean, in an alternate
Barnabas's
reality,
choices dealt Barnabas a rotten hand. I mean,
and if I can interject, the kind of issue that I have with Fate as a character in Dark Shadows, and it's more of a personal thing. Besides the fact that I think it's kind of, first is that most shows that use it as a trope usually don't do it. Usually do it rather poorly. But with Dark Shadows, we only have the real story. Fate, you need a suggestion of this is how things were supposed to be before they actually play out. To your point, Joel, we don't know what really happened. What we would need in order for Fate to really play out as a character is we would need like a whole another 5 years of stories that say this is what really happened without Barnabas, and then be able to track that. It's by this time, there are some time travels. Most time travel stories, and like science fiction, were like, okay, you don't change history, or you're already part of the fabric of history. It's like, hey, I jumped on the balcony and yelled, "Duck, Mr. Lincoln, duck!" And there'll be a doggerel type with the guy pointing and yelling, "Duck, Mr. Lincoln, duck." We only have that in Dark Shadows with 1795 to some extent. And with 1840, because there's that whole 1995 prediction. So Fate really isn't a character here because simply because we don't know how things were supposed to be. And I think Dark Shadows makes a better point that it doesn't matter how things are supposed to be. It doesn't matter what kind of prophecies there are. You still have choices. It also removes any kind of free will from the characters. I mean, to Patrick's original point, episode 417, why doesn't Barnabas just go off into the sunset? Because he's fated if he's fated to die anyway, why make it hard on himself? But it's why I don't think Fate is a character in Dark Shadows, because we don't know what really happened. All we know is that because Barnabas interfered, choices were different. For all we know, it wasn't Fate that brought the ghost of Quentin Collins. Maybe it was Patofi doing a dry run before he came into the future. Maybe it was Judah Zachary. Maybe it's some future threat from like 1980s Colin Port, and you've got Jonathan Frid in his Saturday Night Live suit. Barnabas is a disco king doing that. But I think, kind of going back to this episode in particular, this is a guy who realizes that, okay, yes, he's been dealt a cruel hand, but he's trying to make the best choice he can because he knows he doesn't want to live anymore. They're not good choices, but I don't think he wants to choose death. He wants to choose to not have to deal with it, which are two completely different choices.
No, I don't think it makes the character lose any free will. You have plenty of free will.
With a fate, yeah, because it's why do they have to do anything if they're fated to? If Barnabas is fated to, if Barnabas was fated to always be a vampire, why did he spend so long trying to not be a vampire? He just said, you know what?
That's how you interpret fate. I'm interpreting fate, like I said, the Halloween way, the John Carpenter way.
But Halloween is not a factor at this point.
I'll compare. Look, I'm using it as a comparison to why they're similar. Look, here's a great example. Laurie Strode keeps seeing a man who she has no idea who it is in a mask follow her. Okay. Is Laurie Strode going to die? No, she's not. Though all his fate is really doing is aligning these two people to meet. They're meant to meet. Michael is following Laurie Strode because they are meant to meet. Okay, that doesn't mean Laurie Strode is meant to die. What's going to happen is what's going to happen regardless. Laurie Strode walks across the street. She's choosing to do so, even though, yes, fate is a sense, okay, she's going there, but it doesn't mean she doesn't have any free will, because there's things that happen in the course of Halloween, like conversations keep coming about what? The boogeyman. All through Halloween. When you look at Dark Shadows, Josette is a character who exists pre-Barnabas. I talk about Josette, we get told, Mary Jeremiah. Okay. Now, later on, we hear, well, Barnabas calls, well, that's not true. She wasn't meant to, he says it wasn't meant to be with him, wasn't meant to be with Jeremiah. So we learn in the past that Jeremiah wasn't the one who was supposed to marry Josette. It was supposed to be Barnabas. That changed. So, but Josette's fate, what we were told it was, she jumps, she dies off by going off Widow's Hill. That doesn't really change. She still dies. That's what I mean by fate. Fate aligns itself through Dark Shadows as a character, because you have characters whose fates you can't change. Barnabas can't change his fate in becoming a vampire. In this reality, I'm not getting into parallel time.
The story doesn't go back far enough to give him a fair shot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if Vicky had gone back to Martinique and had, interceded before Barnabas met Angelique, or with knowledge of what Angelique was going to do, tried to interfere there, you've got to get this, further up the tap. There's a science fiction kind of theory called a John Bar hinge. Gordon, are you familiar with the idea of a John Bar hinge?
It sounds familiar, but why don't you explain, Patrick?
It's very simple. It's just a point. It's one of those flashpoints in history where things take a definite turn. That's it. And I don't know if it's James Tiptree or somebody like that. But the John Bar hinge is when Barnabas meets Angelique. Things are already way, way too far advanced by the time Vicky shows up for her to really have any effect. Or if Barnabas were to go back in time or something like that, most of that cigarette's been smoked by the time 1795 rolls around. Yeah, I think you got to get 1794, 1793 to avert that.
Yeah, there's actually a better example from around this time. It actually be produced 2 or 3 years later that kind of deals with free will and time travel. It is it's Doctor Who, John Pertwee's first season. It's a story called Inferno. And Doctor is at a research facility. They're drilling to the Earth's core because they want to find this new energy source, except there's this green slime that turns people into green werewolves. The Doctor's doing experiments, and he's booted into a parallel universe. And the parallel universe, they're actually further along in drilling. And they're having green werewolves, and it's the mirror universe, so everyone's a fascist. And at the end, it's a 7 episode. It's like 2.5 hours, so it's a bit of it takes a while to watch. But by the end of episode 6, parallel Earth's destroyed, but the Doctor manages to get back to Earth. In episode 7, he realizes, oh hey, this character who died in the parallel universe is here. They're not as far along. They've actually had some issues where they've stopped. So you've got, the real history, and the Doctor realizes in episode 7, he even says out loud, free will is not an illusion. They knew that, okay, the way things were going, the parallel world, it was fated to happen. I mean, the world ends. There's no, there's no takesy backsies. That parallel world is gone. It's enveloped in lava. Cats and dogs living together in sin and all that. So that's where you can say it's easier to say. I know you just talked about Fate and Halloween, but Halloween was not even a glimmer. John Carpenter wasn't even in film school at this point. And you need to keep Halloween's name out of your damn mouth. John Carpenter's a good friend of mine. He told me to tell you that. But you need that, okay, this is how things are supposed to be before you can say fate is an active factor. And even in that story, it's like fate is an active factor, but they say, wait a second, nothing is predestined. Because if everything's predestined, and I can say this as a Catholic who grew up with a lot of that kind of, why bother? It's like, well, if Jesus died for my sins, why should I bother being good?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm Jesuit educated, so don't argue with me, Joel. I know my stuff.
Look, okay, Barnabas meets Angelique in Martinique. Who's to say that wasn't fate? That wasn't meant to happen?
Yeah, but who is determining this? Who is the author of this fate? And I mean, because as well as just the universe.
And Joel, if you claim this is your fan fiction, we're ending this conversation right here.
No, I'm just.
Joel, we're not attacking you or anything. It's a chance to talk about objectively the literary concept of fate as a storytelling tool and as a philosophical concept, because it's I'll tell you what, interpreting a story is like science. Okay. And it's like science in this sense. With science, you gather evidence and you move forward with theories based on the evidence that you have. And if more evidence shows up, then you revise your theory. So if there are things I've missed in Dark Shadows episodes that change my perspective, or that should change my perspective, I'm kind of obligated to include those. Maybe I forgot something. Maybe there's some episodes I didn't see or something like that. And in literary analysis, it's the same thing. There may be literary tools and ideas and concepts that help unlock Dark Shadows with greater clarity and thus more excitement about them than the literary concept of fate. And so all I'm really doing is saying, well, maybe I don't really know if fate's that compelling a storytelling element, and that maybe there are other storytelling, theories and frameworks that tie the room together, like the Lebowski rug we love, even more. And that's all.
Yeah.
Fate's such a powerful word, and so we just immediately respond. It's like, it's fate, it's Dr. Fate, it's destiny, my lad. And it's like, well, it sounds impressive, but when you step back and think about it, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, like I personally, I have 2 Fate, and I have to wear socks a lot.
You have what?
2 Fate. It's supposed to be a funny accent.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
What's you guys' favorite scene for this episode?
I think the floating Angelique head, because I'm wondering if they did like a Pepper's Ghost or if they just did like a crossfade between cameras, but it looks really good.
Yeah, it does.
It presages Wheel of Fortune. Remember how they used to do that on Wheel of Fortune when their heads would fly around and like they'd have the carousel with all the stuff they could pick out, and then at the end Chuck Woolery would say, would you like the restaurant gift certificate or account? I like the I like the scenes with the pretty ladies. I like the scene where Barnabas and Josette, kind of deal with each other. I just think that's a Rosetta Stone for a lot of the show. I mean, I learned this is just a week ago that I reviewed this, and it's a little bit of a whole new show for me. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. 1,225 episodes. There are always new things to discover. So, case in point, I have revised some of my perspective and some of my big theories about the show and about the Barnabas-Josette relationship based on what I saw just last week.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon, what's your favorite scene?
I just said the floating Angelique head.
How about you, Jewel?
My favorite scene is when Natalie Dupre walks in and she's checking on Josette. She sees Barnabas, and he turns his face, then he turns back and disappears in front of her. And she says his name, Barnabas. I really enjoy that scene because, again, there's really great effects in Dark Shadows.
If there are any kind of like goth chicks out there looking for an internet handle, Countess Natalie Depraved is waiting for you. That's a good one. I'm just saying.
Yep. He's not wrong.
Tumblr, Discord, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, that would be really good. It's Gord's turn to pick an episode.
Ooh, which episode should I pick? Yeah, I'm going to pick 884.
884. Okay. When do you want to discuss it?
Let's see. Would Wednesday work for either of you gentlemen?
That's fine.
That would
fine.
That would be perfect. Same time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm gonna find another good Ron Sprott episode for my next one.
Yeah, Yeah. Stop the Ron Sprott bashing internet.
Honestly,
seriously, stop it.
Honestly, I just think people who hate Ron Sprott are complete assholes. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, I could be wrong.
Ooh.
Anyway, Link,
Jewel is saucy tonight.
Yow. Saucer milk table of you, Jewel. Saucer for you, Jewel.
Link to Gord Dymowski's Amazon page is going to be in the description box. Link to Patrick McCray's Dark Shadows Day book and Bow is going to be in the description box. I'm going to go to the Seventh Circle of Hell now. You gentlemen have a good night. I'll see you Wednesday. Bye.